Okay, so let's take a look at fungi. A fungus is also a eukaryote, like a protist is. So they have nucleuses, and they can be single-celled or multi-celled. And chances are, you are familiar with at least one multicellular instance of fungi because you've eaten mushrooms, right? So mushrooms are a multicellular fungus, right? And there are different types of mushroom. But fungi also come in single-celled versions, and you also know those too, but you might not know them as fungi. Yeast is a type of fungus, and so is mold. And those are single cellular funguses. So, um, what's the deal with funguses? Fungal cells do not contain chlorophyll, like some protists and plants. So fungi do not carry out photosynthesis, right? Have you ever seen a green mushroom? I haven't seen a green mushroom. Maybe some exist, but probably not because they do photosynthesis. So how do fungi get their energy then? Well, like animals, fungi must obtain their nutrition from their environment, so they have to eat. Many do so by releasing enzymes that break down material into smaller molecules that they can absorb, right? And that's why you see usually mushrooms growing on dead things, old logs, damp, rotting bark in the forest. Um, what it's doing is it's digesting, you know, the bark or the tree that it's on. And that's why on farms, we grow mushrooms in like compost, so they can easily break it down. And um, instead of the way animals do it, animals ingest their prey first and then digest it internally. Fungus is sort of uh, vomit up enzymes onto what they'd like to eat, and then the enzymes break down whatever it is, and they absorb the nutrients back into their bodies. So they do it a little bit differently. Kind of gross. So, although fungi are not plants, they do have some features that are like those of plants. Most notably, cells of fungi have tough cell walls. They're different than plant cell walls. They have some um, different chemicals in them, right? They have chitin in them instead of cellulose. Um, so the types of fungi, again, that you are most likely familiar with are multicellular types such as mushrooms, but fungi also are studied in microbiology, and the microscopic fungi are yeast and mold. What does yeast look like? You've probably seen it as you've poured it out of the jar. Maybe if you made bread once, especially when we're all at home during COVID, a lot of people started their baker training. There was a brief phase where everybody decided to make sourdough bread for some reason. This is what yeast look like up close. They have a very round shape. And the most common way that yeast reproduce is by a type of asexual reproduction called budding. Budding is a little bit different than mitosis. Usually, mitosis produces two cells of equal size, but a bud is a smaller version of the parent cell, right? So they just make little, you can see here we have a picture of a full yeast, and then there's just a little bud. That's its little baby. Under certain conditions, some yeast can also produce sexually, and this involves the fusion of uh, two cells and their nuclei. So this is what yeast look like um, under. Well, the first one is a drawing of yeast, right? Um, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the one that you cook with, or if you make beer, that's also the one that you make beer with. Um, y- so I don't know if you know, like the first beer came first, and then risen bread came second. Some of the the alcohol making yeast got into the bread they were making, and it rose. And people said, "Yeah, we like this fluffy bread. Let's keep putting the beer yeast in the bread." And then you have just a yeast reproducing with budding. So you can see we have the original yeast, and that produces a smaller cell called a bud, and that bud produces a smaller cell. And eventually, the buds grow a little bit bigger, and you can see the original cell is starting to make more buds, right? Kind of neat. Then we also have molds. So whereas we like to see, yeast in our kitchen and we use them to bake, we don't like to see molds in our kitchen because uh, they make bread not tasty. So many molds have a fuzzy or hairy appearance. I'm sure you've all seen mold. That blue stuff that grows on your bread after you've had it too long, and if your kitchen is damp, um, that is mold. And it's fuzzy because it contains these long hair-like structures called hyphae. Like yeast, molds reproduce mainly by asexual reproduction. The most common way is by the form of reproductive structures called spores, right? We've all opened that mystery container of food that has been at the back of the fridge for far too long. And sometimes when we open the container, you see a bunch of dust. Those are spores. And anything they touch that's moist is a place that they will turn into more mold. So, my advice to you, if you like to keep a clean kitchen and if you find a container where you can see green stuff, just toss it out. You know, unless it's in your like inherited Tupperware from your grandmother, I just throw it out. So you don't release the spores into your kitchen so more mold can grow. So the spores are released from a stalk-like structure called a sporangium, and they travel through the air. And when the spores land in a favorable environment, moist, relatively warm, a new mold grows, and each spore divides by mitosis. At certain stages of their life cycle, most molds also reproduce sexually, right? These are very complicated organisms. Okay, so far, protists and um, the two types of protists and molds, they can reproduce sexually. And this involves the fusing of two hyphae from two compatible molds. After fusing, a thick-walled spore called a zygospore forms. This is the cycle. Do you have to memorize it? No, I haven't memorized it. But you can see there's a sexual phase with the zygospore, and there is an asexual phase with a sporangium and spores. Right? Sporangium kind of looks like a little mushroom. So that's it on fungi. Um, you're going to have a little worksheet to read. It's going to talk about some of the major issues um, for understanding fungi, and then you have some, of course, multiple choice, short answer questions where you can practice your knowledge. I will put the um, the answers up on the LMS, and that's it for today's lesson. Uh, the next lesson is the last lesson in the course, and it will be on viruses, and then you don't have to learn anything else. Yay. See you in the next lesson.